What is the role of media in the rise of authoritarianism in the United States and around the world? David Brock drops by to talk about that. It's a pretty amazing thing. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and please subscribe to our channel. On the line with us right now is David Brock, the founder and chairman of Media Matters for America, the author of 6 books, including The Fox Effect, which is absolutely brilliant. MediaMatters.org is the website. You can tweet him at David Brock DC or MMFA, which is the Media Matters Twitter account. David, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Sure. Craig Silverman is this talk show host in Colorado, in Denver, and he was on a Salem broadcast station, and he's claiming that they took him off the air because he was basically not doing the Trump line with regard to impeachment. He was questioning this. The management of the station has come out and said they took him off the air at the time that they did because he just announced that he got a job on another station on another part of town, and therefore they were going to pull the plug on him. I don't know which is true, but we've got that, and we've got Shepard Smith, talking about the impeachment and getting all kinds of flack from the president for that. I'm curious, in your mind, what role do media takeovers play in facilitating the rise of the kind of authoritarianism that Donald Trump is embracing around the world? We've seen virtually all the media in Hungary, for example, Viktor Orban's Hungary now, owned by Orban's oligarchic buddies. What's the relationship there, and what are your thoughts on these things?
Well, I definitely think there's a relationship. I mean, just take the Murdoch empire itself. What's happening really is that, all these conservative-owned networks are having a really hard time covering impeachment, including Fox, and that was why Shep Smith had some problem. And I don't know what the situation was with this radio host exactly, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're trying to enforce kind of a pro-Trump line in these media. But it's difficult because the facts aren't really on the side of the Trump forces. And so they're down to, circulating conspiracy theories or saying that the witnesses are just hearsay when, in fact, we now have a witness who has firsthand knowledge. The Trump defense is very weak at this point, and I think you're seeing that through the media. Fox is struggling with how to cover this because there is actual news here, and so they're forced on the one hand to acknowledge that there's news, but, they're trying to figure out how to sandwich in some of the pro-Trump spin, but the pro-Trump spin is weak. It's inconsistent. President wants his allies to say one thing. They seem to not want to say that. They want to go in another direction. So it's a little bit of a challenge for these conservative media outlets right now, which includes most of talk radio and includes Fox and includes Sinclair in the United States. So I think that's the fundamental dynamic we're seeing.
The Salem network is the one involved in the Denver thing. Talkers Magazine puts on this annual convention for people in the talk radio business, and I've attended them for 15 years or so. And at one of them, and then they have luncheons. And at one of them, I was sitting next to a vice president. I believe he was in charge of programming at Salem Radio Networks. And I pitched my show to him. I said, we're not Christian unfriendly on my show, and but we've got a progressive political perspective. And he very candidly said, there's no way you would ever be put on Salem Network. We are owned by our money comes from Bible publishing. We are a conservative company, and we are only going to put conservatives on the air. Period. Full stop. A U.S. senator and myself and the billionaire co-owner of another network of radio stations, I don't want to name this one in particular because this was in a private meeting, but that company owned something over 800 radio stations. We specifically asked him, would you consider putting progressive programming on any of your stations? Hundreds of his stations were carrying right-wing programming. And he just came right out and said, I will never put anybody on the air that wants to raise my taxes, basically. We only program conservative. And then you look at the rise of Murdoch. I mean, recently, I think it was maybe a year ago in the Sydney Morning Herald, Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, wrote an article. The headline of it, the title of it was Rupert Murdoch is the cancer at the center of Australian democracy. And he talked about how Murdoch owns over half the media in Australia now, the print media, and has corrupted Australian politics, and then moved to the UK and repeated that, and corrupted their politics, and then moved to the US and repeated it again. This media landscape is increasingly looking like the product of oligarchy to me, and one that would not be friendly or functional in a highly functioning democracy, something that the founders might be pretty horrified by. I'm curious your thoughts on all that. I mean, you've been right at the center of all this with Media Matters for a long time here.
Yeah, well, that's, some years ago, I wrote a book called The Republican Noise Machine, which had a lot to do with the subject you're raising now. And that was one of the reasons why we started Media Matters, which was back then kind of a voice in the wilderness, blowing the whistle on the fact that, media ownership is part of the problem here in terms of the Republican Party line coursing through all these networks. And, we saw when Sinclair was trying to expand its footprint, one of the things that Media Matters was able to do through its monitoring was to expose these, they call them must runs, the editorials that they run across the Sinclair network, and they're verbatim. And it becomes a situation where, right-wing media has changed in the Trump era to become almost a propaganda outlet for the White House. So it's not just conservative media. It's really in the service of a particular leader and political party, and I think that's somewhat new. Fox has morphed from being, obviously extremely unfair and unbalanced from putting out just conservative views to really slavish devotion to Donald Trump, and we can see that affecting the way people are taking in the information about impeachment. You've got two different worldviews. You've got two different realities playing out there, which is very different than was the case in Watergate. And even in the Clinton impeachment, Fox was just getting its sea legs then. But now you can tune into Fox and get a completely different reality than what is happening actually in the hearings themselves.
Where does this take American democracy, and do you see any kind of a solution for this? I mean, is this Howard Dean, for example, on Chris Matthews' show suggested, this was years ago when he was running for president, suggested that it's time to say that at law that media companies have to be only media companies, that, MSNBC, for example, could no longer be owned, back then it was General Electric, by a company that wasn't a media company. And basically breaking up the big media conglomerates all around the country, and that we need to basically undo the 1996 Telecommunications Act and go back to local ownership rules. Is that a solution to part of this problem?
Well, certainly that could be a solution, and I think that we'd obviously have to have different political actors in power to put that on the agenda. But that is certainly one answer. Another is, I think, just the constant effort that we do at Media Matters to shine a light on what's going on these networks. The idea is that propaganda, when it's exposed to the public, it has less of an effect once they realize what it is, and that's what our mission has been. And it's an uphill battle, because Fox is more powerful today, really, than it's ever been. Because of its alliance with Trump, and because Trump watches Fox and then tweets what he sees on Fox, and at the same time Fox is taking the lead from Trump. So it's a vicious little feedback loop where you don't really know which one is dictating the other, but it's a combination of both. And it's very corrupt, and it's very, as you said, it's a real threat to democracy. And some of us, Al Gore and others, have been calling this out for some time. You can't really have people making correct decisions in the voting booth when they're consistently misinformed. And of course, it goes beyond just the platforms that you mentioned, but it goes into these social media platforms too. And there are some proposals to break up some of these big tech companies, partly for the same reason that they refuse to accept responsibility as publishers and allow and foment misinformation to be reaching out to the public. And we saw that in 2016, and I'm afraid, we're going to see a lot of that in 2020 as well.